This person said, with all of the unrest in our culture and online, I want to be engaged in the current dialogue to support those who are marginalized and hurting. However, I'm also feeling drained and stressed due to the constant conflict and hostility around the unrest. How do I balance the desire to be involved while also needing to take care of my mental, emotional state?
Yeah, good question. Good question. That uh, the the thing that I would encourage you to try to do as much as possible is engage at a grassroots kind of level rather than at a macro level. That is, we live in a time in history where we can instantaneously and simultaneously be aware of every trauma that's happening in the world, in every nation, country, state, community at the same time, which wasn't always possible.
Yeah.
Right? That, back before internet age and everything being live and connected simultaneously, you knew what was going on with your friends and your family and in your immediate community. And when those happen to be also the spheres where you can actually engage someone and do something and take action about a given situation. And so you became aware of and faced with realities that then you can actually do something to engage and be a part of the solution around. One of the difficulties, so there's a lot of advantages too, of having an awareness of everything that's wrong in the world at any given moment, is much of it you're powerless to do anything about. And even if you could do something about any one piece of it, you can't possibly do something about every piece of it. And so there's a lot of just overload and overwhelmingness. And so it's good to be aware at a macro about things that are happening that are bigger than just the little world that you live in. And so I'm not suggesting that people be intentionally naive or cut off or ignore the larger context of what's happening in the world, or that they should ignore things that are in other parts of the world that they do have influence in some way to engage, or other communities. I'm just saying that it is good to be judicious about how much you take in, and that you focus on where you can get hands-on kind of involved, right? And hands-on involved doesn't mean like responding to a Facebook post or retweeting something. Sure, that's good, that's valuable. I'm not downing on that or dissing on that at all, but that's not what I mean. And that what I mean is, the people in your community, the people in your neighborhood, the things that are happening that you can sit in a room with and have coffee and engage, the person that you can get on the phone with and say, hey, how's this impacting you? What are you going through? What's your response to kind of what's going on in the world around? And rather than it just being kind of a nameless, faceless kind of mass movement thing, get to know the people in your realm and in your circle that are impacted by these things. Have conversations with the people in your family and in your community and in your small group and your faith community, the people that you're in person with, and have that be the majority of your engagement with what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Rather than having very little actual engagement with the people in your circle and realm, and just a complete flood and a constant barrage of all these things that are coming in from all across the country, all around the world. Again, I'm not saying ignore those things completely. I'm saying that you only need like 15 minutes of scrolling and reading on Facebook to kind of get a gist of what's happening across the world. Spend your efforts and energy and focus on the communities that God has placed you in. Rather, again, family, faith community, neighborhood, city that you're in, and figuring out ways that you can engage that in a meaningful way. So that would be kind of how we can focus our energy output onto the things that we can tangibly engage instead of it being sucked dry in trying to connect with more than we could ever connect with or kind of take in.
Right. Yeah, I think overload is a good word for it. That word that you used, just getting very overloaded with
Mm-hmm.
information, with grief, with
Mm-hmm.
confusion or shame, and all of these things. And yeah, I think I love the way that you put it. Giving all of your energy to actually, doing something at a macro level, like you mentioned.
Our emotions are made for that.
Yeah.
Right. And just kind of understanding the emotional makeup of how God made us, that all emotion has an action tendency.
Yeah, and that's a lot of emotion and energy to hold inside of you if you're just scrolling for hours, reading through
yeah.
everything going on and all of the heartache happening.
And it doesn't actually move through to completion
Yeah.
in any way, right? So
Right, which just brings on more shame and more confusion, which is where this question comes from, is of like, am I bad? Am I wrong to need emotional mental breaks?
right, right. And we need a mental and emotional breaks, but we also need to be able to like do something with what it is that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I'm feeling grief and sorrow around an experience, then reaching out and holding that with another person, maybe who's also experiencing the grief and sorrow impact of these things, and us kind of processing that together to a place of completion can enable ourself to move through that, and it enables the other person to move that through that kind of dyadic or relational co-regulation that we're wired for, right? Whereas if we're just holding it with ourselves, we don't do that. Maybe it's anger, right? Anger is a valid emotion that God's put in us. It is right and God reflective for us to experience anger in the face of injustice and in the face of things that violate the heart and character of God, that we should feel angry about those things. But anger is intended to motivate us to action, right?
Mm.
To have courage and assertiveness to stand up to injustice, to stand up to things that aren't right,
Right.
and being able to take action on that. That if we're just kind of like setting with that and feeding that and scrolling, and that there's no like real engagement or direction to go with that anger. And so figuring out, what would God want me to use this energy that comes from my awareness of the injustice and the violation here? What would he have me channel that into? What's the healthy and appropriate and God honoring expression of that anger in order to really address in the way that I can the injustice that we're seeing and that we're facing? Right? That how can God isn't expecting you to fix everything that's wrong in the world, right? But he has placed you in a particular corner of the world and given you real opportunity to do things that are meaningful in the kingdom. And he would have you use your time, energy, resources to impact the corner of the world that he's placed you in. And so be prayerful and be attuned to, what is it that the Lord would have me do in response to this? Don't just sit with it, take it in, tweet about it or comment on Facebook about it. Figure out what the Lord would have you do with that and engage it. And as you do so, it allows that emotion to be heard, be understood, and be acted on in a way that processes through it, instead of it just building and bottling in here in a way that's no good for us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think just seeking the heart of the Father in it,
Mm-hmm.
not just saying all of these things, all of the different things happening, all of the different words being said, at people or to people or by people, just
Mm-hmm.
seeking the heart of the Father, just like
Mm-hmm.
taking a step back and being like, Lord, I know that this grieves your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Let the
Yes.
Holy Spirit lead me into the action that I need to take.
Mm-hmm. Totally, absolutely. That as we engage that prayerfully and allow the Spirit to lead us into what it is He wants us to do with the things that He's brought to us and in front of us, the Lord is faithful to lead us. James says that He gives wisdom generously to those who ask, that we can count on Him to make clear to us what it is we're supposed to do with the things that are in front of us and that are in the corner of the world that He's placed us in. And it's up to us to then be obedient as the Lord challenges us, calls us, and resources us to do so.
Mm.